Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, I'm prepared to feed some worm bins, and the bins that we're going to be feeding are these 3-week-old European nightcrawler systems. 3 weeks ago, we bought these worms out of their old environment, launched these new systems. We let them sit for a couple weeks, and then we fed them at their 2-week age. Today, at their 3-week age, after another week of kind of working down whatever they were given a week ago, I'm pretty sure they're ready for some more food. So we're going to plop in this little portion of potato and cucumber peels and some cantaloupe melon rinds. So I think they're going to appreciate that. But even before we get to feeding these little guys, there's still the matter of the stragglers. So the system that those worms were taken from, 2 systems actually, those 2 systems are still here. And it's actually been, wow, 2 months since we started the migration of the worms out of this material. And like I said, it took until 3 weeks ago to get the first haul out completed. Today I'd like to get haul out number 2 going, and I'm sort of suspicious that even though we're going to get a good number of the worms that still reside in this material out of here, we're still going to need to take some extra measures to try to coax the last of them out of their material. Because I did go into these bins yesterday to aerate and to till things around, and I still found worms in the old castings. So I believe what I'm going to do is set up my bait stations to see if we can do one final attempt to round up worms, and then that last extraction of the bait boxes will be haul out number 3 at some point in the future. I might even consolidate all the material. But to start, why don't we get this little transport container loaded up with whatever's in these horizontal migration feeding zones and see what we succeeded in rounding up. Now, one thing I'd really like to arrange is when we do the haul out of these 2 migration zones, and I sort of try to split the haul out to go into the 2 new systems, the 2 new systems didn't really wind up having the same number of worms. You could see bin number 2 has a good number more worms, maybe about 100 and some odd, I don't know how many, 150 or so extra worms. So when I do bring worms from here to those 2 new bins, fairly new bins, I will be looking to plant a few additional worms into bin number 1 over there. See if we can get those numbers balanced out a little bit. And there was some other information on that board that might have been of interest to you, so, you know, what the heck is a worm doing all the way out there? I go out of my way to set up this really beautiful, damp, well-stocked, fresh bedding, fresh food, good moisture, everything over there for them, and you still find worms wandering out in the dry castings. I mean, I did come in here last night. It was maybe one of a couple aerations that I have. I usually put a record in my tracking spreadsheet to show when I have done an aeration of the material when I'm attempting to get the systems to dry a little bit. And a lot of times the aerations of my systems go hand in hand with running a fan, even if it's extreme, where a lot of drying is needed because things are really very wet. In the case of these, I've not been running a fan on them or anything, but you know, the whole idea of the material being uncovered out here is that it's you know, being left to dry and become less of a place where the worms would want to remain hanging out in. But like I said, I went in here yesterday and I did do a little bit of an aeration, and I did still find worms out here on the far end. We'll do a quick preview of it, but I think I've already decided, as you saw with my bait boxes, that we are going to try to round up the last of the worms from this material, whatever worms didn't make it over into the collection area. Because it does seem to me like, you know, every handful produces a worm. You know, admittedly, it's not a lot, but I don't see the harm in giving these little guys one final third try at exiting their finished casting. So this doesn't have to be like a perfect separation here, but the cardboard is attempting to keep us from too greatly soiling these really nice castings with whatever material that the feeding zone might have been made up out of. So I only use these little partitions for basically that one purpose, I would say. I guess it's also just a good visual indicator to show you where you had set things up. Oops, it looks like this cardboard did sort of tuck in underneath the feeding zone. And you know, these things are not going to be part of the reset here, I believe. We're just going to be setting up bait stations. And that's kind of the other reason I thought we might consolidate, bring all the bring all this material, all these finished castings down into a single container, maybe pour them all into here, into bucket number 1, and then set the 2 bait stations up in one container. So that's just one of my ideas, and you know what? I might actually decide on what I do after, because I don't know how much time I've got today to deal with this stuff, but these castings can certainly just sit here in this box for an extra day or something if I had to get back to this at another time. Invited to dinner over at my mom's, so that only gives me so much time to get some of this taken care of, as well as a couple other things before needing to head over there. But I'm thinking as long as I've got these little guys in my sights, might as well evict as many of them as I can to be part of the haul out, not to be left with the stragglers. Last little round of stragglers, but this right here is going to be what we've hauled out of bucket number 1. I'm doing my best to, not bucket number 1, tub number 1, bus bin. Doing my best to provide a pretty good view of how many worms have come together in this second haul out. Like I said, when we release these little guys, I will be doing it with a little bit of an offset to try to include a little bit extra in the bucket with the fewer worms in it. So we've only got a few additional worms left over here. Let's do the same over in bucket number 2. Why do I keep calling them buckets? Bin number 2. And then we could get them reunited with their friends and neighbors who were part of haul out number 1 3 weeks ago. And I would assume that after a week, the foods that they got last time, stuff that didn't seem like it was going to last a whole long time, probably gone by now. So I'm definitely curious to see how those new bins are doing. It's always kind of an anxious time when you're checking in on new bins. These bins only being 3 weeks old, still have the kind of that potential to go a little bit haywire and require some fixing. Although there was no signs of anything that would make me think that that's what I should expect today, but still just kind of being prepared for a potential calamity, even though you're not really expecting one. Okay, so here and there, still running into worms that are exploring this old stuff, really enjoying being there. We'll just set those collected worms aside just until we can round up the haul out from bin number 2. Here and I'm gonna find a worm and I'll be compelled to include them with the haul. Like I said, this material will get baited and we'll give the last of the stragglers a chance to make their way into some sort of a collection box. I'm also thinking that any further drying of this material for whatever stragglers are still remaining in it would be kind of cruel. So I'm thinking that some sort of plastic covering will be put on the material to enable the moisture in the bin to recirculate and sort of collect a little bit on the top surface, so that any worms that really feel like they need a little jolt of moisture will have a means of getting some. So as you saw, every handful or so produces a straggler worm still hanging out in this material for whatever reason, despite my best efforts to create a nice cozy spot for them. But whatever, what can I do? I can only do my best to try to produce an environment that would appeal to them and be satisfactory to them if they should make their way into it by chance. I'm always curious whether it is by chance or if they seek it out or if they sense it over there or something like that, you know. I guess my current thinking on it is that it is for a large part just to chance. Once again, we are tucked in under, if it's been done the same as it was in the other systems. So getting this partition out without ripping it to pieces would be nice. Again, we've only got so many worms hanging out on these things. We'll just try to swipe them off and get them over there with the rest of the crew so we can get this haul out, underway. Although we're well underway at this point, we're almost done actually. So, like all in between folds of corrugated cardboard and all this other fun stuff, I'm thinking it might not be the most wise use of time. Let's save that sort of playing around for another time. And here, if there are any little guys still stuck on the cardboard, they should be able to make their way over into the castings if the cardboard begins to dry intolerably. And I hope we've got room enough for these little wormies as we haul out bin number 2. Once again, I'm going to be doing my best to kind of move the material around in such a way that we'd be able to get a better look at how many worms are nestled in between the folds of this newspaper. I created little food bundles, so all the food was delivered in little pockets. They're all over the place. They're in here in good numbers. They're all tucked in between all the nice material that had all the food folded in onto it. So it was all nice, juicy, delicious feeding area that they all came out for, and it does look like the better portion of them came out for it and very few were left behind. Because the worms can sense when there's something like that they're in, you know, it feels good and they enjoy it. They're more likely to hang out, I believe, as opposed to worms that start sensing that the material they're in is not, you know, as comfortable or whatever as could be, and they might start looking around for something more comfortable. Sometimes that's what I think is the main thing that's going to get worms moving. Alright, I think for the most part we've got them all. Anyone that was left behind should be able to just pile into their remaining castings, and I'll deploy those bait boxes to possibly consolidating all the material out here in these 2 tubs. But this should be our next focus, getting these little guys reunited with the occupants of the other 2 bins over there, bins number 1 and 2 of the 3-week-old systems. Let's not forget, we're going to have to put an extra maybe 150 or so worms over into the lesser populated bin. So let's get to work releasing these little guys. Hey Siri, how much is 1230 minus 1063?
Just a sec. The answer is 167.
That was a really tough math problem, Siri. Thanks for your help. Alright, so that's our aim. Try to get an extra, you know, 100 and, how much was it? 67. Additional worms loaded into bin number 1 to see if we can get these numbers to balance out. But we're not going to trust that I did a good job distributing the worms. We're going to get everyone to provide their input on how many worms were hauled out. Not so much about the haul out, more about the launch. So how many worms were launched into each bin. But we'll do that at the end because we want to get their feeding in here too first. And then we can proceed after everything's been settled down after the feeding. We can focus on releasing the transported worms over. So I have to assume, well, I don't have to. I guess I usually don't assume that everything's okay. I usually want to sort of see that everything's okay. And, well, as you saw, about 1,000 worms living in here, perhaps a little bit more. And with it having been a week now since we last fed these little guys, perhaps there's more worms down in the feeding area than over on that edge. Seems like there's some worm activity down here near the middle. Let's just try to keep up here with bin number 2. Here it feels like I'm seeing a few more worms in the material here and there. And I felt like I just bumped into a piece of cabbage. Usually I'll freeze the stuff that I put into my worm bins, but I think with that cabbage it didn't get frozen, and by not having been frozen it didn't sort of go through that sort of process where things get a little bit mushy after they've been frozen and get thawed out. Ooh, oh boy, wow, that was quite a little jackpot. We didn't dig deep enough over in bin number 1, did we? I don't think that accounts for, yeah, there we go. Now we're seeing some worms. Oh, a whole bunch of them over here too. All right, let's let them settle in. We can give them their feeding next. You know, although brand new systems don't even really need too much, it's kind of a good habit, whether they need it or not, to just include bedding with the worm bin feedings. Unless you're already kind of at that point where your system's near its end or you're at its capacity and you don't want to have your castings littered with stuff like this. Towards the end, I can understand that, but in the early days, more bedding, the better, usually. That's a good rule of thumb. Now, this stuff was pretty much a rock when I pulled it out of the freezer, but that was a little while ago. I've allowed a little time for this stuff to thaw here. And I'll be satisfied if I can at least chip off enough to say I evenly distributed it. If I can't break all of it apart because it's still so frozen together, that'll be fine. But I do feel like I've dislodged about half of what was in this pile, and the rest of it we can scatter in bin number 2. All these nice juicy bits of cucumber. There's another end too, so they both get one of those, plus a bunch of the peels. Here's some melon. Oops. We even have some feeding zone indicators to go in as replacements. So the other thing we can do is give them their old feeding zone indicators that are nice seasoned bedding type materials, these old coffee filters, and let them have those to nibble on as yet even more supplementary bedding. And I think with those pieces of melon right beneath them, they're going to become really tempting things. So you know what? Maybe a little sprinkling of worm chow. That'll almost guarantee that that paper is going to get nibbled away. Alright, so we didn't really have a chance to see how things over on this edge look, so maybe we can just use some of that material to cover up with. And you know, before we can lay down our feeding zone indicators, we got to get our transport worms. All the haul out worms from haul out number 2 need to get positioned in these 2 systems. So let's just get to the point where we leveled things off. Here's more cabbage. Try to leave the cabbage down in the bed. Maybe one day it'll eventually break down. So just a little bit of cover for the feeding zone. It'll be like kind of a little shock for them, right? They're going to come out of that material that they're in right now, dive down, and they're going to hit a bunch of that frozen stuff we just gave them. Should confuse them a little bit, so whatever. They'll figure it out. Let's get them released. So, as I said, we need a few extra 100 in here, not even 200, but approximately 200 more over here. And I'm thinking if I just do a pretty good size scoop, grab a handful of stuff, grab another big handful of stuff, perhaps we'll have something sort of evenly distributed. So far it does sort of feel that way, but it does feel to me like we can get 2 more good handfuls out of here. And let's see what just emptying things looks like. And it looks like we did a pretty good job splitting them up. Although I think, to be fair, I'm going to bring a few extra over into bin number 1, because it does seem like doing so is the right thing to do if our goal is to balance things out as far as worm populations go. Alright, I think I got them all. Nope, not all of them. There's one more. So let's give these little guys a moment to settle in, and we'll be finished. Well, I can see a couple little wormies got stranded on this piece of paper, preventing them from being able to dive down. There's another guy over here, looked like he could have gone for it, but he was just sort of lazy. So I did find one worm left behind in the transport container. Let's make sure this little guy doesn't get left behind. And then I'll take one more close look. Sometimes they crawl out from under something, but I think we've gotten them all for the most part. But I'll double check just to be sure momentarily. So that's it, everyone. I really look forward to seeing what everyone says about how many worms we just released into bin number 1, presumably a little bit more than what we released into bin number 2, but then also everyone's best guess at how many worms we released into bin number 2 as well. So please leave a comment, let me know what you think. There was the original numbers of how many worms lived in here, and now we're going to be collectively coming up with a new guesstimate of the increased worm count in each of these systems based on everyone's estimates. I'll always take all the estimates and average them together so that whatever number we come up with is a number that we arrived at together, which I think is always a lot of fun. All right, things look great. Everything's humming along nicely. We just added a good number of worms, if you ask me, to both systems. And you got to admit, leaving those stragglers behind wouldn't be right. It ain't going to take a whole lot of energy to deploy those bait boxes. Give the material another little chance to give up the last of its worms, and then we can consider that stuff as harvestable. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.